Taylor Decker, he talked to ESPN, and I want to show you guys this. And shout out to Eric Woodyard for the work he's been doing. He interviewed Taylor Decker, asked him to give his perspective on his journey with the Lions, and he asked him step by step his opinion about getting drafted, having Jim Caldwell as a coach, because Taylor Decker's been here through it all. I mean, he's seen it all here through his career. And he gave answers for every chapter of kind of like an inside look, because you don't really hear the guys really speak about certain things like Jim Caldwell, Matt Patricia, getting Dan Campbell, losing as much as they did early on with Dan Campbell, and now to where they are. And I want to show you guys a couple of the quotes he said, and it'll just kind of reflect. Off season's about having conversations, all right? And this right here, to go through and get Taylor Decker's perspective on a lot of the shit that happened here in this city with the Lions is absolute gold. This is on ESPN. Eric wrote this, covers Lions for ESPN. And, they asked him the first question. It started off with him getting drafted, and it goes down. Look at under Caldwell, 9-7, fire Caldwell. He gave his opinion. Matt Patricia getting hired. They even went through firing Patricia and Bob Quinn, and they went through hiring Dan. The speech, like they went through everything. So I want to go through a couple key parts of this. Obviously, getting drafted. He talked about it. He was told he was going to be a tackle for the first for his 10 to 15 years here. He loved it. He took pride in it. And obviously, Bob Quinn drafted him. Fun fact, which was a whole nother thing. So he could actually draft offensive linemen. I'm gonna be honest here. Bob Quinn actually, he was hitting on some offensive linemen, but that's really about it. You go down here a little lower, but the under Caldwell thing, this is what I really enjoy hearing. All right. So we always argue, not us specifically because we haven't had that conversation, but in general, the Caldwell stuff. Eric asked him, under Caldwell, Detroit finishes 9-7 and reaches the playoffs in Decker's first year. The Lions lose in the wild card round to Seattle Seahawks 26-6. Decker says, I remember winning games on 2-minute drills, coming from behind, and for a lineman, that's about as hard as it gets, being in 2-minute, but we seemed to always find a way to win. Well, not always. We were 9-7. But when we had the opportunity and had the ball, we were finding ways to win. And just to have the opportunity to play in the playoffs as a rookie, from my perspective, I was like, well, that should be the floor for expectations, right? And then the following year, they go 9-7 again. And they asked Decker about that. Then they fired Caldwell that season, right after the season ends. That was after his 4th season, and he signed an extension a year prior. Jesus, that's such Detroit right there. Decker says, I love Jim. Thought he was great, but they thought it was time, for a change. And my job as a player isn't to question that. My job is to say, okay, let's try to get a fresh start and try to move forward, because every year there's going to be change in this league, coaches, players, staff, and everything. The following year, they hire Matt Patricia. Here comes Matt Patricia.
Oh,
and he says,
the pencil behind the ear, the fucking card at training camp, the most disgusting and most embarrassing signing as a head coach in NFL history.
It's a whole thing with this. And he even says, I knew he was a hot-headed coaching candidate that people wanted. I knew coming from Bill Belichick, from the Bill Belichick tree, it was going to be a hard work tree, but I was familiar with that college. That's how former Ohio State coach Urban Meyer and OSU strength coach Mickey Marotti were in college. Like, yeah, we're going to be talented. That's not going to substitute putting the time in to outwork your opponent. So I knew it was going to be hard work for sure, but I wanted to win, so I was willing to do anything. I remember after those first OTAs, it was harder than previous ones. And then here's the next one. Midway through what would be their 3rd straight season without a playoff berth, the Lions fire Patricia and general manager Bob Quinn. Patricia's final record in Detroit, 13-29-1. Quinn, who had been the team's GM since 2016, leaves the franchise with a 31-43-1 record. Decker says the thing that was frustrating was that it can be hard to get a positive change when you're getting wins here and there, but it didn't seem like we were improving. It felt like we were starting to dip. It definitely lends credibility to the statement that it's a cutthroat business. It's not about your feelings all the time, whether your intentions were good or not. So was I surprised initially? Yeah, but that's just part of the business. It's much like when Jim got fired. You got to turn the page, and we've got to go to the next thing because things weren't where they needed to be around here. They thought it was time for a change. Then here comes Dan Campbell. And they asked him about the speech, the kneecaps. All right. And he answered, he said, I love the speech. I thought it was great because he was wearing his heart on his sleeve and he was speaking, especially in hindsight, knowing what I know now, those were like core beliefs for him. Those were things that he truly and deeply believed in and wanted to do. And again, in hindsight, seeing that vision come to fruition is pretty cool, especially because I'm sure there were a lot of people that were like, that's not the coach we wanted, which I do remember that. I saw it everywhere. Like, what are you doing hiring that guy? And the charisma of being a head coach, being a leader of men. I liked his introductory press conference because he was kind of rough around the edges and you don't always got to be buttoned up. We fight for a living. That's what we do. And he represents that and embodies that. And the fact that he has walked the walk, he played 11 years, that lends credibility. What do you guys think of that, by the way? Before we move on.
That's preaching to what Booner was saying earlier about why he was on Booner's Mount Rushmore. I mean, it was spot on.
Isn't that wild?
I mean, everything it says, I think, like, you could think that the head coach that comes in, but just like the Dan Campbell, I posted it on our Instagram today and all of our socials, the speech, the biting the kneecaps. And if you just watch it again, I went back and watched some of it, and you could just tell it's just, hey, like the culture, everything that comes with it. And again, like there's a lot of people who have that culture and you don't win games, and it's tough. But when you have both and you kind of know you got the right guy, and you could someone who's like able to wear that on their sleeve and it's able to just say, hey, this is what I'm about. Remember, who was it? Was it Rick Spielman? That was just like how Dan Campbell he does not care. Like it was funny in that video. He was like, Dan comes in, he takes his coffee and he puts it back, and he did that with his coffee. Yeah. He just puts it back and he sits down and he tells you how it is, how he's feeling, whether it's something you want to hear or don't want to hear, or he wants to hear or he doesn't want to hear. It's like he's just him, and he's just always going to be him. And like that's what it is. And Matt Patricia was not that. Like Matt Patricia was a guy who wanted to be the hard-nosed guy who was
he just knew he wasn't
tough, and he wasn't, and he never, like, I don't even know if he's ever played a day of football in his life. Maybe he did, and I just don't know about it. And like he just was like, I don't know. It's you could tell a guy fake and a guy's not fake and walking around. It's easy,
authentic. Absolutely, that's a great word.
Taylor Decker, you could tell Taylor's like, I knew it instantly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that's a good point, bro.
It's a perspective that I know it's.
Thanks, Klotzy.
It's not like a hot take or anything, but just going through this stuff is so interesting to me because Taylor Decker is someone that can really speak to it. That's why when they won the playoff game, we all kind of back now. We're like, man, those guys deserve it. Taylor Decker through multiple coaches, multiple regimes. He's seen it all. And they asked him when this team drafted Penei Sewell and Ali McNeil, Ahmed Ra, which at the time we didn't know that they'd become pillars. Decker said, I actually knew the team would draft Sewell before. They said, if Penei's on the board, we're going to take him. That's funny. They told him that, actually. I did not know that. He said, I didn't know much about him, but I was trusting the front office. In hindsight, they knocked it out of the park with those guys, so it's cool to see that. It's got to be fun for Brad Holmes to make a lot of his first picks, and he got it right. And then they asked him about the 13-1, and as Dan Campbell's first year as head coach, he says, we obviously did not have a good season, but from the leadership of the team, their message to us didn't waver. It was the same. This is what we're going to do, and it's going to be really hard. We're going to dig ourselves out of the depths of the deepest hole where things were not good around here. So it's going to take some work, and we're going to take some time. And it's going to take some time. It's going to be bumps in the road, and we're going to take some lumps, and it's not going to happen overnight. Even though the results weren't there on the field, it did feel different. The next year, they draft Aiden Hutchinson. Decker comments on that. He says, I knew a little more about him than I did Penei because I watched Ohio State games. Bringing Hutchinson to the team is a match made in heaven. One thing about him and Penei is it doesn't matter how they feel, how they slept, what's going on, how well they're going to go out there and do the exact same thing every day. That's a commendable thing, especially as a high draft pick. And the front office did their homework to get guys to represent that because that's what we do here. And then he also comments on ending Aaron
real quick. Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just a situation. It's something that we've heard a lot the last couple of days, and a lot of the people in the mini camps and OTAs and press conferences have been doing this. And I guess it's just the narrative that I have going on with Hutch. And we know what Penei is going to be, probably, like Klotzy said, he's he's most likely the first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the best Lions to ever do it. Is it something crazy that like Taylor Decker, these guys in minicamp, they keep putting like Panay and Hutch in the same name to where they're like, these guys work the exact same. Like obviously they're probably going up against each other a lot, but it's more so that these guys show up, do their job at an extremely, extremely high level. It makes me really think that like this Hutch thing it just keeps pulling me in. It's just like the fact that he just keeps getting put in the name or in the same sentence as Panay Sewell when it comes to how he's working and his mentality and mindset to the game. That just gets me absolutely pumped up. Like with the guy's talent, for him to have that Panay Sewell mentality, I think there's something to say about that, because that means like he hasn't taken that jump yet. He will take that jump. Like am I crazy for thinking that, guys?
I don't
like this is like the third or fourth time this offseason.
Because, I mean, if you think about it, what is the most important? I know outside of quarterback, you need a good offensive line. You need the guy in the trenches. And the same thing applies at the defensive side. Those guys are what set everything up for the rest of the guys, because they're expected to be the leaders. They were the guys that were the number 2 and the number 7 overall picks and the first 2 picks in the first round of this rebuild. So everybody's looking at them and they know that. So when they know they have to go into work, because if they don't work that hard, then the guys that were drafted after them, the free agents that are signing, they're not going to work that hard either. They have to set the tone. And I just think they mastered the accountability that Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell wanted them to have. And they also have Hall of Fame upside. So when you pair that together, no, Booner, it's not crazy whatsoever.
It's just nuts. Like the 2 best players have that.
Yeah, that's what they want. You have if you're Brad Holmes and you're taking a player that high, especially in your first 2 years here, you have to get tone setters, not just talented players, but guys that are. You're going to build this thing around him. That's what Dan told. I think he told Panay that on the phone. He's like, we're going to build this thing around you, and they knew that because of the player he was. And now looking back, even in hindsight, they were spot on. Same with Hutchinson. They are those players are what they want in every player, and not just talent. Obviously, you're not going to get that, but mindset. And Amon-Ra, I would say, is one of those players too. And he was a 4th round pick. So, hey,
sure.
It's
work.
Your best players have that work ethic and that mentality. It changes everything. It changes everything.
Yeah, they asked him also about ending Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau. And after the 1-6 start, they won 8 of their final 10. And they asked Decker, he said, they made us feel like we were getting closer. So it was turning from let's go out here and compete really hard to let's try and start optimizing this thing and get those 3 to 4 plays that can make a big difference and really zero in on the details. I think the team bringing in players where they didn't have to coach effort. See, that's what we just talked about, was huge for us able to do that so quickly. And then J-Mo, they asked him about J-Mo and then the gambling policy. He says, and he commented on that, he says, it's like we've got to keep moving, much like when coaches get changed or players get traded and stuff like that. It's like, oh, damn, that sucks, but what are you going to do? It just is what it is. And then they talked about Jameer and Sam Laporta. And both players making the Pro Bowl as rookies, becoming key cogs along with St. Brown and Sewell in that offense. Decker says, I think Brad Holmes has proven that positional value isn't a real thing. We're going to go get our guys that we know can fit into certain spots, or we can do certain things with, or who represent what we're about and will be good culture fits. I think they've nailed that with a lot of culture fits. In hindsight, it's like, of course you draft Jameer. Like, why wouldn't you? Lucas, I know you love that one. Next one, Detroit clinches his first division title. They asked him about that. He says it's just cool to be a part of something like that. Monumental. 30 years is a long time, and that was the first monkey off your back moment. It was something that I hadn't done. I think about it in my career that it took 8 years, but it's been 30. It's pretty crazy, and especially for it to happen as fast as it did. Obviously, the journey from 3-13-1 to an NFC North title. And then they asked him about the Rams beating the Rams in the franchise's first playoff game. He says, loudest stadium I've ever been in, which I don't disagree with that. I think Ford Field is honestly the biggest advantage, I think, in the NFL. One of the, definitely.
It even was like when, going back to your guys', this might fit your narrative, the Stafford days when they were good, like Ford Field was like one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. So this year it's going to be, without a doubt, one Gap, Arrowhead probably.
And he says, loudest stadium I've ever been in, which then the next week it was louder after that. The game environment was incredible. You could feel all that bottled up, pent up frustration from the fans in the city. And it's just like, quote, I got to enjoy this. And this is credible for us. It was like, just get into the playoffs and let us play anybody. And we're going to be confident to go out there and try to win that football game. Of course, it's poetic with Matt coming back, but the opponent didn't matter. because it was about us and what we're going to do with this team. It's about something bigger than one player, one person. It's about the Lions and the city and this organization. And then they asked about the game against the 49ers there. He says it was one of those situations where we were trying to figure out how to make those 3, 4, 5 plays that can make a big difference. That can be big difference makers. And we've been making those for most of the games we played in the season. For however well we played for 60 plays, there's like 5 or however much, I'm just throwing out a number, that just didn't go our way. And those were big difference makers. And that just makes you go back into the Rolodex of what I could have done differently. As much as it hurts to look back on, and it sucks, but for us, I don't feel like it was our only shot. I don't feel that way. Then they asked him about the NFL draft and then re-signing St. Brown and Sewell and extending Goff. He says, you got to keep your guys, even if they've only been here for 3 to 4 years. This is all they've known, and it's very meaningful to them. Just like I've been here my whole career, is very meaningful to me to be here. And I think they recognize that. These are our guys that unquestionably represent what we're about and want to be about. Who cares if it's 2 years early? Let's keep them here. Then they asked him about this upcoming season. This was the last thing they asked him. And he responded, if I had to put it in one word, I would just say contender. I know it's going to be very hard, if not harder, than it was last year, because people might do a little extra homework when they're playing us, but just throwing the character of our locker room, that's just what we as a team want to be about. If you're not trying to compete for championships, much like taking pride in what I do, it's like, what are we doing here? This is all about winning. This is what we're here for, and I think Brad and Dan have done it the right way for however long they're going to be here. That's what we're going to be doing. So
love that. I love the end of that.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
What
that's culture change.
What an absolute dog. Taylor Decker, I love that man. I do. I think he is one of the foundations. I mean, he's getting older, and that comes with other things. But as a human being, Bob Quinn drafted someone that he didn't know would already be a culture fit for this regime. I mean, he is pretty much him and Frank are culture fits. Absolutely. Like, they are the right kinds of players. And for him to speak, it's awesome. You don't hear Taylor Decker. I mean, he's only done a handful of interviews in his whole career. So to have that interview and to get his perspective is special.
There's a reason, too, he's still around with this new regime, and I'm sure they'll sign him or, find a way to get him a contract done as well.
He's coming up
heading
soon
into this next season. Yeah, I think this is his last year on his contract. So I'm sure they're going to find a way, and they're probably already having conversations. So like a guy like Taylor Decker, just listening to that story, like him going from, the beginning of his career getting drafted here in one of the worst positions to now, or not one of the worst positions at the time, going to the playoffs and then getting into one of the worst positions. And then now, like, it's unbelievable to see kind of that story arc of his career. And the fact that now a guy like to hear the mentality of these guys now, like, hey, you're either here to win championships or you're here to, or leave, but we're here to win championships. And that's what it's all about. Like, to hear that in Detroit is crazy.
Yeah, Taylor Decker is a man whose NFL career has been scarred. I mean, have you guys ever seen the picture of, like, dude's probably like 18, but it's the picture he goes to World War I, and there's him smiling, and it shows us like 2 years later, and he looks like he's 10 years older. That's essentially what Taylor Decker's career has been in Detroit with the NFL. He's had no hope. It's just been doomsday, but he's finally got some momentum going. So I think when you talk about guys who are going to be willing to take a discount to stay in Detroit, Taylor Decker is absolutely going to be one of them. I don't think the Lions are just going to absolutely lowball him. I think they'll throw him respectable money, but he could probably get a bag somewhere else just for 2-3 years. But I think he'll stay in Detroit. 3-year, $24 million deal, 25, somewhere up in that range. I don't know. It'll probably be more than that, but I think he's a guy that should be in Detroit because he knows exactly what this team has been for the last 10 years. So he's a guy that I think just his mentality, his knowledge is just valuable within itself outside of his play.
Yeah, I don't know if
go on.
I just don't. Yeah, I think Klotz, like, I think he's a guy that would take less money to try and win a Super Bowl somewhere in Detroit where he's like kind of grown up, and he's, it's the same thing as Frank retiring. It's like you've been here your whole career and you've gone the ups and downs and you've been at the lowest here in the franchise, and it's like, or is he? I don't see him being like, the money's not right, I want to go get a lot of money somewhere else. After, like, when you go through all of that, you know what I mean? Like,
he's happy.
I'm just think of examples like
he's happy.
You don't just stop. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, I have to keep this going. It's like,
even
let's
Joe
talk about
Thomas in Cleveland. Like, he wasn't winning a damn thing. They didn't have any like success ever, and that man just stayed. He just stayed.
I just don't see him being like, hey, I want a max deal. Like, I don't think is he going to ask for that, and is he going to get that? I don't know, but like obviously he's not going to take like the cheapest deal of all time. But I think there's going to be a point to where like the Lions and him, they're like, all right, we've got this deal, whether it's like a 2-year deal or whatever it is. I do think they're going to find a way to keep. There's no way Taylor Decker leaves next year.
I do respect this about Taylor Decker. I respect a lot of things, but his professionalism, like they're just moving regimes, and he's like mature enough to be like, hey, something must not be working. You know, I'm just like, he didn't sit there and be mad or because again, there's every right to be upset, especially him as a player and having different regimes. Every regime that came in, he was like, let's see what this is. You know, I'm open-minded. Even Jim Caldwell being fired, Matt Patricia being fired. Here comes Dan Campbell, and he's like, I like Dan Campbell. He didn't sit there and go, oh my God, this guy. Yeah. Like I just went through 2 head coaches, and this dude's yelling about kneecaps. Like he was like he's like, no, I like him. You know, I like this guy. He's just open-minded with every coach. Even to Matt Patricia, he was positive about. He was like, yeah, you know,
Patriots.
I'm used to this. Like, dude, I respect a guy with that type of mindset. I mean,